Yeah, so as Gabriel said, welcome everybody to our last panel discussion. It will be a very short one, just half an hour, so 5 minutes for everyone, about how do we engage in different conversations, discussions with different stakeholders. So, but discussions between researchers and politicians, researchers and companies, researchers and resistance movements. And so we will start immediately. And so 5 minutes everyone, and wrap up for the discussion and future perspectives. I will leave to everybody that who present themselves.
Yeah, hi, I'm starting. I'm Frank Melcher from Montanuniversität Leoben. I'm actually teaching geology and what we call economic geology. And I have a few messages, probably a little bit of education. We go back to what we actually started yesterday. I mean, what is this Critical Raw Material Act actually telling us? We already know that some of those numbers, the 10%, the 40%, the 15%, this is really difficult to, to realize. But what is more important for me is, and I'm sorry there's something is missing, but actually, why do we do that? There's the green transition, green technologies. We have digital technologies. What actually does that mean? Digital technologies require a lot of energy. So digitalization is actually one of the reasons that we do this stuff, because we need so much energy in the future for digitalization that we actually, when we want that, we have to build these wind farms and all these solar systems. And then we have space and defense, and this is something that actually we never talked about. I mean, I think in the moment there is more tanks that every day get destroyed, and they are not recycled, All this stuff that goes into military actions, we don't talk about that. But of course, we have to keep in mind that this is also part of the game here, actually, what is the Critical Raw Materials Act. So I have a few messages and a few things to remember, probably. If you talk to some people also now, as now know about this Critical Raw Material Act, but I want to emphasize a few points. The Critical Raw Materials list, these 34 raw materials, these are actually minerals and rocks. But what you see on the chart is these Te, Se. Anybody know what Te is? It's tellurium. It's an element in the periodic system. Tellurium, selenium, bismuth, germanium, gallium, etc. These are not raw materials. These are chemical elements. And these chemical elements come from rocks and minerals. And usually, especially those that are on the list, are typical byproducts. We don't need a lot of them. A few hundred tons, sometimes a few thousand tons. That's actually nothing compared to the world steel production, okay? And this stuff is actually never mined because you have a tellurium mine or a selenium mine. It's a byproduct of something. And the good message is, basically, this has been mined already. It is just sitting somewhere in tailings, in dumps, etc. Nobody cared about it before we had the solar revolution and the windmill revolution, These things are, or many of them are already there. So recycling is actually something that we have to do. And the second thing is, so there's more than one valuable in an ore, and there should be no waste. Actually, in Austria, you don't get a permission if you open a mine and you produce waste. You actually have to sell everything. And even in the waste, for a lithium mine, 1% of the ore is lithium oxide, and 99% is something else. You have to actually find a customer that is buying this. There's always a value to that. And that actually would decrease mining projects. So, why do we mine gold and diamonds, actually? Do you know how much gold we mine per year? Anybody an idea?
Too much.
3,300 tons. But do you know how much ore we actually have to carry around to blast, to transport, to mill? It's almost the same amount that we need for the iron ores, And this is billions of tons per year. Gold is not a critical metal, but more than 50% of the world exploration budget goes into the gold mining. And diamond, I don't want to talk about diamonds. Why are we doing this? And then, again, In gold ores, there's all the stuff that I already mentioned here. There's tellurium, selenium, etc. Nobody recovers those because you can't make money with it. Yeah? So if we set up metallurgical facilities to take that material from a gold ore, then we would benefit. Yeah? But gold mining companies usually don't have an interest in that because it's a high investment. Yeah? And so we need strategic thinking if we open mines. So we need to really recover as much as we can. That would be one part of the solution. The second is science and technology are key, so we can actually develop methods to recover all this stuff from tailings, whatever. But of course, there's always the economic side, and we were talking a lot about this. We have to make money somehow, yeah. But they are not the ultimate solution. And what I learned in this workshop is actually really on these conversation issues, yeah, with indigenous rights, with landowners, and also in Central Europe we have lots of problems. So science and technology have to be put forward, and this is a problem in Europe, yeah, because not many people are actually really interested in this anymore. Why? Future mining in Europe, why not? Yeah? Because we have heard that yesterday, we are completely underexplored. We know much more about the geology of Namibia than of Central Europe, yeah? Because we have much more drillings there. Yeah? We have a very long mining history, but we didn't follow up. I mean, 40 years ago, we decided we go out of that. So there's no workforce anymore. There's no education anymore. And this is why foreign companies come to us, yeah, want to start mining. And this is what also in Central Europe people just don't like. Yeah? So there is no, there's a big frustration about this. So NIMBY is a big challenge, not in my backyard, of course. Yeah? And okay, and I leave it with that. Thank you for your attention.
Hand over directly.
Okay. Hello. I had a really fun PowerPoint, 2 slides that I don't get to share with you because I think numbers and data is important. And this relates to one of the kind of the key themes here today is that I think we got a wide diversity of people here, and we can all agree that we need to actually have more data and have more information. And so what I was going to show you today is something from the International Energy Agency that compares offshore wind, solar, nuclear, thermal, and all these things like this. And it was going to be this nice, pretty graph. It would be kind of fun, give you something to look at. Yeah, we've been talking, sitting here for a while. But what I was going to show you is it was going to show you how enormous the offshore wind was in terms of its material intensity. It was going to show you how enormous the different wind turbines and different things like this were. And then I was going to show you, I was going to click the button, it's going to pop up, and it was actually going to show you how it wasn't even including steel or aluminum in those statistics. And part of this was supposed to be an anecdote to show you actually how deeply underestimated these numbers are in terms of the levels of extraction that are there. And that's the thing. If you look at these different life cycle assessments, if you look at these different studies, the methodologies are rather honest, that they're pretty much don't have the data. They're making assumptions. They're running it off of S&P Global, different private sector networks that are trying to collect this open source information, and that the data either doesn't exist or they're making up insane assumptions that aren't realistic in terms of what they're doing. So I was going to put this to my next slide. That was going to, it's not that you all looked, I tricked you. But I was going to put it to the next slide that was going to show it was going to show you one, in terms of carbon emissions and how they're rising. I actually don't think carbon's a very good metric for these things, and it actually displaces the conversation, which is a story of another lecture. And it was also going to show you the different kind of material mix of kind of energy use, the different energy mixes there in terms of actually how much is being used and how transition isn't really happening. But really what I want to stress, because I've gone through so many of these studies, and they're so misleading, and then different journalists or policy centers or public policies just running with these things because they're super technical. And what I want to stress from going through these things for the European Environmental Bureau, for my own work, is to more or less say how much isn't being accounted for in the statistics that are there. So one fun thing that's not being accounted for, and I'm loving what Frank's saying here a moment ago in terms of actually really stressing what isn't being accounted for. But so all the fun e-bikes and scooters, and this is the sad thing, and let's be clear. I'm really sad that somehow mining has become environmentalism. I'm sad that environmentalism became new digital technologies, smart sensors, that somehow walking, riding bikes, engaging in convivial technologies, and if you're in a university, everyone hears me talk about this, the amount of digital applications, and it was mentioned the other day in one of the rooms we were in, how many crazy technologies and screens and things that we have, and actually how do you stop this, and how do you not have this, and how do you not have 4 different digital programs from Canvas and Styria to Leganto to all these things. And I mention their names not because I get money from them like a lot of the people at the university, but yeah, so I'm really unhappy about the direction in terms of actually what's being forfeited, in terms of actually how we could use our skills, how we could use different technologies to cut down material and energy use. And to again stress, all the e-bikes, scooters, they're not in these general, you'll see them from the internet, you'll see them from the World Bank reports, you'll see them in the International Energy, you'll see them all the big reports, and it's old data, and it's so many missing data. There's no e-bikes, there's no e-scooters. I would love to see, they don't even have many of the reports on the different digital and smart sensors that they're putting everywhere as a matter of green stuff. Energy infrastructure, high tension power lines, transformers, these are not being accounted for in there. And these are funny things because all the different aluminum, all the different steel, they have a high level of recyclability. But guess what? If in the European Green Deal, if your main thing is to actually spread transformers and grid infrastructure everywhere, these minerals are actually locked up in existing infrastructures that are ultimately serving as stock markets for buying and selling, trading, and encouraging the growth and use of energy. And again, back to the university, all of the great programs and Google clicks and data centers that we're using to have these things. Yeah, so to sum it up, I just want to stress the importance of actually having and getting this data, which leads to the last problem in terms of what is this data being plugged into these models. It's not adequate. It's not adequate enough. And I speak to you as someone, and I can be cliche, as an anthropologist, that this needs to be mixed with people on the ground and looking at the impacts and all of the complications of really messed up and sad stuff that's often going on there, which relates to a big theme that we talked about here in terms of what is actually driving the demand for these things. What is and how is this working? Because it's, as I mentioned the other day, you know, the advertising budgets for all these different companies to get us to keep consuming, buying things, planned obsolescence, upgrades for these different products, not being able to repair these products is another huge problem. And it's just to stress that there needs to actually be real data. This conversation desperately needs to improve in terms of actually understanding how destructive industrial and computation systems are in terms of what we're living and how we're doing these things, to even assess and understand the depth of the problem. Because right now, I don't think doubling down and tripling down on this direction through so-called green mining and expanding mining as environmentalism is the right direction. It's for sure the wrong direction. And I think everyone in here knows this, but it's a big political challenge in terms of changing that. But with that, we can do better as researchers, and universities can certainly improve what they're doing. Thank you.
Invite Karin.
I just thought it would be better to have a real panel discussion and not one statement after the other. But I think I tried to make some points, maybe a little bit in the same direction as you go in terms of questioning resource consumptions, but at the other hand also for a more informed debate about mining and about environmental impacts, but also then the use of mining. So, I mean, I think the reason why people are here and gathered here is at the same time because mining has a huge environmental impact. It does destroy biodiversity in many places. Often there is low local content and not enough effects on labor. Often mining companies, they do pay low taxes, as we see in Peru, for instance, a lot, even if there is a tax regime that should benefit local people, but they're kind of getting too many exemptions, mining companies, but also mining creates export revenues for countries. So there is a lot of impact of mining, and at the same time, there's more impact in burning fossil fuels that we also have to stop. So now the dilemma is that we have been hearing, and I think that's the reason why people are here, that mining is presented now as a solution for climate change at the one hand, because we need renewable energy and we need minerals for producing the renewable energy, and this serves at the one hand also for legitimizing mining. But at the same time, yes, minerals are needed for renewable energy. So I think the conversation that we need as like a connection between science and society and politics and companies is mining for what and how, so that we first start with discussing about our resource consumption and about our energy consumption, and that we look at the projections and that we question projections that are there. So if we, and sometimes I think if we look at projection of resource use and of mineral use, we take them quite uncritically. I will also use those figures quite uncritically. 60%, 60 times more lithium, 15 times more cobalt we're going to use, and therefore we need mining. But if you look at the assumptions behind the projections, then you see the assumption is business as usual. But what is usual? How can we assume that what we are doing now with increasing our resource consumption is usual? Couldn't there be another usual? Couldn't there be another assumptions behind our projections? So when we see where can we reduce our resource consumption in terms of buildings, in terms of roads, in terms of cars, in terms of whatever infrastructure, then we can see what do we really need for renewable energy, and what could we avoid to mine, or where can we use existing minerals. So I think to look at the assumptions behind the models would be a good idea, and this is we could do as scientists to look, couldn't there be other assumptions, couldn't there be other projections, how can we move forward as a society with less resource consumption and with less energy use. And then if we decide that mining has to take place because we need it for useful, like for instance for renewable energy, then we should look at how this mining is done, which conditions, and there come in all the people that work on responsible mining who are here, that work on improved technology, and then also who benefits. You know, how can we guarantee that the mining companies do pay enough taxes, for instance, that also benefit local people? I mean, if mining has to be done, and if society decides in an informed discussion that some mines have to take place, how can we guarantee that local people do benefit from this as well? And also because gold was raised, I mean, I would like, I mean, I haven't heard this from scientists, but I would like to have a discussion about gold. And I mean, all this gold is stored in central banks. Do we really need tons and tons of gold in central banks because just our monetary system is based on this? I haven't heard any discussion on this, but I think maybe we should combine discussions about monetary policy and gold, you know. And do we really need all those gold reserves? I mean, you know, just because we think they are valuable, maybe they're not as valuable. Maybe they would be more valuable in the ground as a healthy environment. And I think maybe like the conversation with like indigenous groups who are fighting against mining could help the whole societies to create another vision of how do we imagine our future life with less resource consumption, with more connected to nature, with more connected to less energy use. And finally, maybe for the Critical Raw Materials Act, because we see the Critical Raw Materials Act should serve at the one hand to secure increased mining in Europe, because mining has been outsourced a lot and there was not enough exploration. But there's also parts of the Critical Minerals Act that concentrates more on the circular economy, on exploring, for instance, deposits that you have said there's a lot of minerals in existing deposits that we don't even know that they exist. So maybe this Critical Raw Materials Act should be more used for also the circular economy aspect of how can we use deposits that are already here, how can we introduce more circularity measures. And maybe because I'm running out of time, I think the last thing would be circularity will not come as a naturally. Circularity needs regulations, and not everybody will like the regulations for reparability, for less resource use. I mean, incentives will not be enough for creating a circular economy. We need really, really stringent regulations, and the CRMA lacks actually those real regulations, but we would need them in order to advance to more circular economy. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Styria, Loginova. I'm a researcher at Center for Social Responsibility in Mining, based in Brisbane in Australia. And I'm originally from Russia, from Komi people in the Komi Republic. And my statement is rather a general reflection, I guess. So one thing that the Russia's invasion of Ukraine and war, I guess, really opened my eyes on is the power of the narrative and the power of the stories that as a society we are telling each other. So how do they convey and perpetuate ideologies and values and ideas and our priorities and aspirations as well. So these narratives can be very powerful. And so I found myself, much more in the recent years than before is, always challenging my assumptions and double checking and triple checking everything and then questioning again. So I guess, I'm not comparing the war and this green transition here, that's not the point. But I guess, we also operate with the narratives, and we have this narrative that we need more materials and kind of to save the planet, we need more mines and infrastructure and all these technologies. And I guess the second narrative here is that this infrastructure and mining have an impact on the environment and livelihoods, sometimes and often destroying them. And so these challenges of saving the planet and addressing or preventing these impacts are real and they are urgent. But kind of these assertions, they're also taken as a given and few question or interrogate them. And this is understandable because there are so many uncertainties, unknowns, as a few of them have been mentioned now, but also unknowables, the things we would not really know until the aftermath. Perhaps, in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, such as an impact on indigenous culture, as we've heard over these 2 days. So to have or not to have a mine or big infrastructure project, it is an ethical dilemma for many policymakers, companies, but it's also very much existential and very emotional dilemma, as we've heard from the indigenous people here as well. So, and it seems like, few of these decisions will be satisfactory, both for the communities and also for all these different targets we are trying to achieve to save the climate. But kind of one thing we do know is that this narrative can also unleash very powerful things, right? So we are talking about critical materials and potential impacts from different places in Europe, and Australia is a very big thing, and Canada, all the way to Namibia, kind of in quite specific circles like ours. And I guess after interacting with numerous mining companies while being in Australia, working in the institute, or including other countries as well, like Finland, for example. So I guess it's my perception that these narratives unleashed these enormous opportunities for corporate interests and political interests. So political kind of, power to capitalize on this narrative. And this is not just the mining companies, there's this whole, global system and networks of commodity traders and investment firms and banks. And similarly, there are so many standards on transparency, on ESG, so environmental social governance, risks on aspects and free frame of consent. With research also showing that many of these standards, they're falling short, with industry being quite influential in some of them, promoting their own interest, and also some perpetuate with colonial practices, for example, through FPIC in some context. So I kind of see this transition is largely empowering already these very powerful actors like the industry and the governments. For example, there is so much funding allocated, at least in Australia, to advance and develop these projects and infrastructure, mineral processing technology, AI, and the amount of money, funding which goes in there is enormous. But barely anything goes to empower people and communities to make these decisions which affect their lives. for the indigenous people to make decisions, it's a lot of time and effort and emotions and stress. And this is not really, they're not paid for this, I guess, right? It's all voluntary basis, I guess. So something which I see for this network is how, we can contribute to leveling the field. And I guess also focus on, minerals and communities which are absent from kind of general attention, such as lithium and DRC come a lot, Democratic Republic of Congo come a lot in our narrative, but there are so many other minerals and places which we don't really know about. And the other thing, I think there is so much nuance in every of these dynamics. So geologists would tell you that not every deposit is the same. It's like our fingerprints. Every deposit is unique. But also the community, the social scientists would tell you, every community is unique. It's unique how the community at these frontiers are entangled in all these global supply chains and networks and encounter these projects and make decisions about them. And I think we can generalize across indigenous peoples and mining projects, but it seems to me also that to address these dilemmas we're talking about on the ground, it will be individual actors in this particular place making the decision with different values, different concerns. So yeah, they would be the one making these difficult choices. So I think this network can do is to interrogate this complexity. I think it's important to focus on these global processes acting upon these frontiers, sacrifice zones, what we call them. And it's something I've heard from my community when I did my PhD and there. So, I studied local dynamics and how the community makes decisions and participate in the decision-making process. But they told me, why do you study us? Go study the industry and tell us about this because we want to know how the industry operates. So, and I guess also the network can interrogate with different perspectives. So with every story, uncovering these different levels, like an onion, which might make us cry sometimes. But yeah, I guess, having this opportunity to challenge my assumptions and to challenge our assumptions, that's, I think, could be a good thing to do. And to keep talking. Yeah.
Okay, so I try to keep this brief. My name is Magdalena Pupp. I work for the Austrian Ministry of Finance in the Mining Directive and in the unit of mining policy or raw materials policy. And I'm gonna talk very briefly about the underlying issue maybe. We have a problem. We have, as a society, as a global society, have a problem. And we may not be responsible for the problem as individuals or as peoples, but we are still a part of the problem, willingly or unwillingly, simply by the fact that we are here. We are alive, we are a part of consume, not only of luxury goods, but of food, of water, of shelter. And for all of these things, we need natural resources. So, and this problem that I'm talking about is called climate change, and we hear so much about the climate change. And what is the first mitigating factor to climate change? And I think that we as society need to change. We need to take a different viewpoint of how we conduct ourselves, what we consume, of what we take, of what is really necessary for us to survive as a global society, how we go into the future. But without hampering the development, and please take this with a grain of salt, of the lesser developed nations and countries to come where we are at a state of luxury, of safety. So the problem about societal change is often that it takes a long time. But the thing with climate change is that we need action now. We need to have decisive action now. So we have a problem here. And the European Union and some other parts of the world decided that to mitigate at least some effects of climate change, we do something that's called the green transition. So as we heard, the green transition is not the the holy grail of mitigating factors. This is just one of many pathways that we need to go for the future, probably. But as we have discussed in the last couple of days, that this decision for the green transition comes with consequences. Not only consequences for us as the European Union or all of the Western states that have decided to make green decision, but for others as well. As you see on this beautiful map that we painted, the mining in Europe, oh no, can you see it? Oh, it's the red, you can't see, sadly, yes. So the mining in Europe is the only continent where mining has been going down in the last 20 years, not going up. So we shifted our responsibilities of the cake to everybody else, but we are not taking the responsibility as Europe on our own shoulders. And I think it is on us to take back some of the responsibility. And this is the reason why I think we need a Critical Raw Materials Act to take back some of the responsibility we have in our decisions and not just give it to everybody else to suffer. The thing about the green transition is that we need raw materials, and as I just said, so we need to increase the domestic mining. The thing is that climate change does affect different areas and different peoples differently. Not only the effects of the climate change per se, but also the effects of the mitigating actions we take against the climate change. And that's the reason we do need to keep talking. We need to keep asking uncomfortable questions. We need to keep on hearing protests. We need to keep on hearing good and bad ideas about how we go into the future. And I think as policymakers, it is especially important that we not keep on talking to people, but with people, and especially start to listen to people, so we can go in one direction that is feasible for all. Thanks.